Fear Point, Episode 4, The New Apartment. Written and performed by Kevin Duffy. Bree and Adam were newlyweds. After years of living in Adam's stuffy old college apartment, the two finally decided that as a married couple, they needed an upgrade. After months of searching, they found the perfect place. It was the second floor of an old brownstone just outside Kenmore Square. It was in walking distance of Fenway Park. It had tons of bars and restaurants, and it was right off the Green Line, so getting to their jobs was super easy. Adam was a loans officer for First National Bank in Somerville, while Bree taught at Pierce Elementary School in Brookline. Their young lives were just about perfect. All that was missing was a place to call their home. It was in May 2017 when they finally double-parked that moving van out in front of the building. First morning, 10 a.m. All in all, they didn't have that much stuff. A few boxes of clothes, some electronics, a queen bed with a simple floating wooden frame, 2 dressers, 1 couch, a 65-inch 4K TV with a TV stand, a small dining table with only 2 chairs, and some miscellaneous items that they collected over the years. This new apartment was going to seem super bare compared to the 600-square-foot studio they were coming from. Adam unlocked the front door and looked at Bree with a huge smile across his face. "I have to do it," he said as he scooped Bree into his arms. "Wait, no, don't be lame," she replied. "I can't help it. It's like my core function," he joked as he stepped through the door with her. He walked with her into the middle of their new spacious living room. They spun, taking in the views of their new apartment. The exterior wall had several large windows with excellent views of the street. The left wall was pretty plain, but it had an offshoot hallway running to the 2 bedrooms and to the guest bathroom. The entry wall had a spacious kitchen with an island separating this space from the living room, and the right wall ran from the living room all the way into the kitchen. It was on this wall that Bree first noticed the painting. About 3/4 of the way down, towards the kitchen, it hung there for all to see. It was terrifying. It looked like a cross between the Mona Lisa and the Scream. Portrayed a woman with a big scar on her head, pale, pained expression on her face. Her eyes were dark and sunken. She was skeletal thin. "Gross," Adam said, eyeing the painting. "Where the fuck did that come from?" "I don't know," Bree said. "Was it here when we toured the apartment?" "Definitely not. I think they had like a big cabinet there or something," Adam replied. "They did," Bree snapped her fingers, remembering. "This beauty must have been on the other side of it," Adam added. "But why'd they leave it?" Bree asked, puzzled. Adam shook his head. "A little housewarming present." Bree cocked her head at him. "Well, I freaking hate it, so get rid of it." "As you wish," Adam said with a bow. Bree loved The Princess Bride, and Adam was constantly quoting it. He walked over to the hideous picture and took it off the wall. He then walked with it back to the door. "I'll toss this out on my way down to grab the other things." Bree watched him go and then looked back at where the picture was hanging. There was a sort of shapeless red spot on the wall, about the size of a tennis ball, right where the picture had been hanging. She walked up to it to get a closer look. It wasn't paint or a spill of any kind. It was just kind of a discoloration of the wall. Bree reached up and put one finger on the spot and immediately got goosebumps all over her body. She pulled her hand back, quick, and looked around to see if Adam had seen that. He was still down at the van, luckily. When she looked back, the spot was gone. "Get a grip, Bree," she said to herself. "It's probably just that hideous painting playing tricks on you," she thought. Adam and Bree spent the rest of the afternoon unloading the van and getting their furniture set up. Adam left around 4 o'clock to bring the van back to U-Haul. He said he'd pick up dinner for them on the way home. Bree went to work unpacking the rest of their clothes and their belongings, get them tucked away into various cabinets. She had just walked back into the kitchen when she heard a noise from the living room. It was a soft thump. She peered over the island and looked across the room. The sound did not repeat, so she went back to work putting things away. But again, she heard the thump. She put down the dish rags, walked into the living room. She stood right in the middle of the room and listened closely. Silence. "It's just the sounds of the apartment settling," she told herself. The old place made noises too. She turned to go back into the kitchen when she noticed the red spot again. It was right there in the same spot as before, although she could have sworn it got a little bigger, about the size of a softball now. She walked up to it and stared at it point blank. She put a finger up to it like before, and again the goosebumps set in. But this time she kept her finger on it. The thump noise sounded again, and this time she felt it in her finger. It was like the spot had a heartbeat or something. She pulled her hand back quickly and stepped back from the wall. Her forehead was laced in sweat. Hands closed around Bree from behind and yanked her off her feet. Bree screamed at the top of her lungs and threw an elbow back into whoever was holding her. Adam reeled back, holding his stomach and laughing. Jesus, honey, didn't you hear me come in? Adam managed to get out amidst the rolling laughter. Bree put a hand over her mouth to try and conceal her own laughter. I'm sorry. I honestly didn't. You were back so fast. Fast? Adam questioned. The van drop-off took forever. I've been gone for like 2 hours. 2 hours? Bree said. She ran over to her phone to check the time. There's no way. How could it have been that long? Bree asked. Adam stared at Bree, puzzled by her puzzlement. Are you feeling okay, honey? I must have lost track of time is all, Bree said. Adam pulled Bree in for a big bear hug. It's okay. We had a big day is all. Let's get some food and then we can just take it easy for the rest of the night. We have the rest of our lives to put away all this, he gestured to the boxes, shit. First night, 11:45 p.m. A thunder crash outside jolted Bree awake. She was sweaty, and the sheets were sticking to her skin. She looked to her left to find Adam, but he was not there. Where is he? She thought. She stood and walked over to the master bathroom and flicked the switch on. No Adam. Opening the bedroom door, she peered out into the dark hallway. Hey, Adam, she called into the dark. She waited a few moments. No response. He must be in the kitchen, grabbing a water, she said to herself as she stepped out of the bedroom. She made her way down the hall, hand running along the wall for guidance. She still wasn't used to this new space. As she exited into the main living area, she was dumbfounded by how impossibly dark it still was. It's like her eyes refused to adjust. Adam, she called out again. Still no response. A lightning flash lit up the living room, and for a few seconds, she could just make out Adam standing across the room facing the wall. Bree was about to take a step towards him when the preceding thunder roared into the room, causing her to shriek and step back. Get a hold of yourself, Bree internally scolded. It's just thunder and lightning, for God's sakes. She stepped across the room and stood a few feet away from Adam. Her eyes finally adjusting to the black of the room, she could see Adam's gaze transfixed on the place where the red spot had been. But Bree didn't see the red spot. She saw nothing. Was he sleepwalking? She thought to herself. I don't think he's ever sleepwalked before. She cautiously reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't seem to notice. Then he started to hum a tune that Bree had never heard before. Bree had enough of this freaky shit. She gave Adam a shake. Adam! He stumbled back. What? What the fuck, Bree? Is everything all right? Is everything all right with me? You were just sleepwalking or something. Is everything all right with you? Bree replied. Adam stood up straighter, rubbing his temples. Sleepwalking? Really? I don't remember. Bree leaned in close and put a hand on his forehead. Do you feel okay? He pulled back from her touch. I'm fine. I'm just tired. Let's get back to bed, he said, and walked back to the bedroom. Bree watched him go and then turned back to the wall. She was positive that Adam was staring right where that red spot was earlier today. She shook her head and went back to bed. Second morning, 8:45 a.m. Adam left around 8 to meet up with his buddy Jim. Jim had some old bar stools and a storage unit that would go perfect for their new island. And they would need those extra seats tonight because they were hosting a housewarming party for their friends and family, which gave Bree plenty of time to finish emptying the remaining boxes and basically get all their clutter cleared up. She noted that 2 very important items were missing from their boxes: a pair of crystal wine glasses that Adam and Bree used at their wedding. They weren't priceless or anything. They were cheesy. They had Mr. and Mrs. stenciled on them, but they were important to Bree, and she wanted to keep them forever. She went room to room looking for the glasses, but got caught up admiring their new place. It felt great to have a nice place to call their own. Very adult, she thought. She looked over to the wall where the red spot was just the day before. Still no sign of it. This is great. Clearly just a weird, exhausting day taking its toll. But just for her own peace of mind, she decided she was going to hang a picture over the spot anyways. Help permanently forget about the whole thing. She went to Adam's closet where they had moved all their photos to keep them out of the way while they were moving heavier, bulkier items around. She intended to grab a large wedding photo she had framed. It was her favorite photo of the two of them. The photographer really captured them in a happy moment. As she picked up the frame, another photo tipped over and landed face up on the floor. Bree looked down and was shocked to find the painting of the girl from yesterday staring right back at her. Didn't Adam throw this out? Bree asked herself. She put down her wedding picture and scooped it up. She was sickened by this thing, needed it out of her house. She didn't want party guests showing up and seeing it. She quickly left the apartment and walked down to the dumpster behind the building. Without a second's reconsideration, she tossed the hideous painting right in. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she strode back to the apartment. That was until she saw the red spot back on the wall in her living room. This is freaking crazy, Bree said aloud. She stormed into the bedroom and grabbed the wedding photo. When she came back into the living room, the spot was gone. Nope, don't give a shit. You're getting covered up regardless if you're there or not, she said to the spot. She attached 2 of those Velcro wall-hanging stickum pads to the back of the picture frame and gently pushed the picture onto the wall. She took a step back to verify the straightness of the picture, and it seemed perfect. Bree spent the rest of the morning hanging pictures and getting the apartment even more homey. Second night, 7:30 p.m. The party was in full swing. Friends, family, and the new neighbors from downstairs, the Porters, were all there. Everyone was coming up to Bree and Adam and congratulating them on their new place. They were drinking and eating and generally having a great time. As the night went on, people started to filter out. Bree found herself talking to the Porters. They were an older couple in their 60s, but they still had this vibrance of a younger couple, like the actors you'd see in an erectile dysfunction commercial. So were you all settled in? Mrs. Porter asked. Just about, Bree replied. A few odds and ends to put away and a few more pieces of furniture to pick up. Well, it looks great so far, Mr. Porter added. You're much farther along than the last couple that rented this place. Mrs. Porter elbowed him in the side. Oof, Mr. Porter puffed out. Clearly something Mr. Porter wasn't supposed to be talking about. After an awkward pause, Bree asked, what happened to the last tenants? Well, it didn't really work out for them here in Boston. They moved from Chicago, I think. Their names were Jake and Sarah. And that was back in February. February? Bree said, a little taken aback. It's only May. They moved here in February? Why didn't it work out? Bree asked. Miss Porter started. He killed his girlfriend, Bree, Mr. Porter finished. And then he killed himself. We heard the gunshot. We found them, Mrs. Porter said. Bree's mouth hung open. Holy shit. How long did they live here before that all went down? The Porters again exchanged looks. 3 days, Mrs. Porter said. Bree's stomach dropped out. Second night, 11:45 p.m. Bree woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She found it hard to catch her breath and turned to wake up Adam, but he wasn't in bed. Not wasting any time, she made her way into the living room. He stood staring there at their wedding photo. Adam, she yelled from across the living room. No response. She clapped. Adam! No response. She walked over to him and noticed that it wasn't the wedding photo he was staring at. It was the fucked up painting of that blonde girl. Even more disturbing was behind the photo. Spidering out from all corners of it was the red spot. Adam turned, noticing her. His eyes were white, full white, no irises or pupils. He reached a hand out to the painting and gently caressed it. A horrible smile stretched across his face. Bree screamed at the top of her lungs and then fell back, tripping over the corner of the couch. She flipped over and tried to crawl away, but Adam was on her in seconds. He wrapped his arms around her waist and hoisted her up from the floor. She kicked and fought. "Bree!" Adam yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" She stopped and looked at him. His eyes were back to normal. "Bree, what are you doing? What is going on? Why are you attacking me?" Bree didn't know what to say. Her heart was pounding in her chest. "Adam, you were out here staring at that fucking painting." Bree pointed at it. Adam turned and looked at it. "I was what? Where the fuck did that come from?" Bree's mind raced. Does he really have no memory of this? She thought. With genuine concern in his face, Adam sobbed. "Bree, I don't know what's going on." Bree reached out and hugged him. "Neither do I." But that wasn't entirely true. Whatever was happening here might have happened before, to the previous tenants. She continued to console a shaken Adam until sleep finally overcame them and they went back to bed. Third morning, 9:20 a.m. Bree and Adam slept well past their alarms. The light filling their bedroom was blindingly bright. "I'll have to get some blackout curtains," Bree noted. She got up first and went to the bathroom. A nice long shower was definitely justified this morning. She stood at the sink, preparing to brush her teeth, when she noticed her reflection in the mirror. She looked terrible. Her eyes had huge dark bags under them. Her skin had grown a few shades paler almost overnight. It's the stress, all the weirdness, Bree thought. After her shower, she decided she was going to go for a walk. Adam was just waking up and said he was going to take a shower, then work on hanging the TVs in the living room, in the bedroom. It was the last remaining task on their move list. On her way downstairs, she ran into Miss Porter outside of her door. Her hands were full of grocery bags. "Oh, hello, Bree. Thank you for inviting us to your party last night. We had a lovely time," Miss Porter said. "We were more than happy to have you. We'll have to do it again soon," replied Bree. Mrs. Porter struggled to unlock her front door. "Let me help you with those bags, Mrs. Porter," Bree said, taking a bag from her. "Oh, thank you, dearie. You're a lifesaver." Mrs. Porter opened her door, and Bree followed her into the apartment. It was gorgeous on the inside. Basically the same layout as Bree and Adam's apartment, but this home was full of life and memories. Every wall had beautiful art. Furniture was so homey, yet somehow elegant. There was a piano in the far corner of the living room, and on the wall between the living room and the kitchen, a massive brown cabinet. Must be where they keep their TV, Bree thought. This was the kind of home Bree wanted to build for her and Adam. "Your apartment is stunning," Bree told Mrs. Porter. "I like it, but I'm thinking of changing it up," Mrs. Porter replied. "Forgive my opinion here, but I wouldn't change anything," Bree said. Mrs. Porter smiled back at Bree. "You're too kind." Bree, realizing she was keeping Miss Porter from putting away her groceries, walked back to the front door. I have to get going, Mrs. Porter. Gotta get some exercise in before it gets too late in the day. Have a very nice day. Hopefully we'll see you later. Bye." Bree left the apartment. Bree needed to lose herself for a while, decompress from everything. So she popped on her earbuds and went for a nice, long, relaxing walk. She needed it. All in all, the third day at the apartment was probably their best. After Bree's walk, Adam and her went and grabbed some lunch. They picked out some of those blackout curtains and other miscellaneous items for the apartment. They spent the afternoon just doing absolutely nothing, lounging on the couch, watching TV, till about 5 when Bree got up and started to make dinner. They ate, cleaned up their mess, and then retired back to the bedroom to watch a little more TV. After turning off the TV, Adam pulled Bree in for a close snuggle, which was something Bree absolutely loved to do. The snuggling eventually gave way to kissing, which eventually gave way to some much overdue lovemaking. Finally making some good memories in this house, Bree thought to herself. Shortly thereafter, they fell asleep. Third night, 11:45 p.m. Again, Bree woke with a start, her heart pounding just like the previous nights. This is nuts, she thought. She reached across the bed for Adam, but again he was gone. Fear flooded into Bree's thoughts. He's going to be out there, and that picture's going to be up again, right in front of the fucking red spot. She slowly made her way out of bed and into the hallway. It was dark, darker than it ever had been, she thought. She was hearing an eerie creaking coming from the living room, which stopped her progress cold. Bree leaned forward, trying to place the sound. She couldn't. Finally, mustering enough courage to move again, she walked the remaining steps into the mouth of the living room. Adam wasn't there, but the picture was. Bree became enraged at the sight of the thing. She stormed over to it and ripped it off the wall, throwing it crashing to the floor. The red spot again seemed to have branched out in all directions behind the picture. "What the fuck are you?" Bree yelled at the wall. The sound of thundering footsteps behind her caused her to spin. Adam was sprinting at her from across the room, arms outstretched like some fast mockery of Frankenstein. She quickly spun out of the way as Adam crashed into the wall. He threw a wild arm out as he hit, and it made contact with Bree's nose. She heard a crunch, and her vision went fuzzy. She could already feel the blood running from her nostrils. She regained composure just as Adam lunged for her a second time. She pulled out one of the new island stools and tripped Adam up. Bree ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door behind her. He was at the door almost instantly. He started pounding on it with his fists, kicking at it. It wasn't going to hold. Cell phone, she thought out loud, but when she turned to her bedside table, the phone was gone. Adams was missing from the table, too. "Fuck," Bree yelled. "He must have hit him. I have to hide." Bree went over to the bathroom door and turned the light on, then locked the door using the push button on the handle and slammed it shut. She then tiptoed over to Adam's closet across the room and hid herself inside. As soon as she got the closet door shut, Adam smashed his way into the bedroom. Through the thin slits of the closet's bifold door, she could see Adam's head giving the room once over, looking for her. Before keying in on the bathroom, he walked over to it and again began to smash and pound on the door. Bree could see the gashes and cuts all over his hands from his bid to get through the bedroom door. Poor Adam, Bree thought. What a time for your sympathy. He's literally trying to kill you, she said to herself. Bree looked around Adam's closet for anything she could defend herself with. There's really nothing. Clothes, shirts, pants, shoes, and ski boots. Big, heavy-ass plastic ski boots. She picked one up and put it on awkwardly like a boxing glove. Not very threatening, she thought. Adam finally hit the bathroom door hard enough to send the door rocketing past the lock and into the wall. He rushed into the bathroom, tearing back the shower curtain. He turned just as Bree drove a ski boot into his face. He let out a gurgled grunt as he was knocked back into the tub, blood erupting from the deep cut on his forehead. Bree ran out, heading for the front door. She tripped over the same damn stool that Adam did. Stupid fucking stool. Adrenaline pumping, she hopped up and quickly got to the door, but Adam grabbed her from behind and threw her across the room. She landed on an end table hard. The force of the throw sent a lamp that was sitting on it skittering across the room. Its cord ripped out and sparked at the plug. Bree struggled to her feet, but Adam quickly closed the distance between them and drove her back into the wall. His hands clasped around her throat. She panted and wheezed, trying to get air past the vice-like grip of Adam's hands. His eyes again all white, his face emotionless. "He's going to kill me. I'm going to die. It's the same thing that happened to the last tenants." Bree's hands went limp at her side. She couldn't struggle anymore. Then her hand brushed up against something, the top of the lampshade. She grabbed it. Using all of the will she had, she lifted it up until she could get a grip of the thin neck of the lamp, and she swung it wildly at Adam's head. It exploded on impact just above Adam's left temple. He collapsed to the ground in a heap. Bree took in a deep, painful breath. Her vision had been going black at the time, was coming back in flashes. Not wanting to waste any more time, she bolted for the front door. But she paused, noticing her reflection in the mirror by the door. She looked over at the painting left at the side of the wall. Her face now matched the painting perfectly. Adam's body began to wriggle on the floor. That snapped Bree back to action. Once in the hallway, she beelined it for the staircase. She was going to hide at the porter's until the police arrived. Outside the porter's door, she raised her hand to knock, but a noise coming from inside gave her pause. There was a weird, almost chanting sound emanating from the apartment. Bree listened for a moment before trying the knob. It was unlocked. She slowly pushed the door open, but stopped it halfway and then slipped inside. She took a few tiptoed steps forward and looked into the living room. She wasn't really sure what she was looking at, but Mrs. Porter was naked in the middle of the living room, inside of a large painted circle with odd symbols drawn all around it. She was sort of convulsing in a strange hypnotic manner. There were low drum beats playing through the stereo system. Mrs. Porter began to hum. Bree recognized the song. It was the same humming sound that Adam was making the night before. Mrs. Porter's gaze was locked on something across the room. Bree followed her stare and found her TV cabinet open. Only it wasn't a TV cabinet. It was an altar or something, covered in candles, most of them which had already erupted over themselves with wax. In the back of the altar, Bree saw a terrifying stone bust of some kind of gargoyle. From the look of it, it had a sleek bald head with two gnarled protruding horns sticking up and inward above the forehead. Below that were two glasses. The one with the word Mr. written on it appeared to be filled with a red liquid, and the one with the word Mrs. written on it had a small knife with the same red liquid dripping down the blade. Well, that solves one mystery, Bree thought to herself. Having seen enough and wanting nothing more to do than to make a run for it, Bree turned to go. "Oh, don't leave yet," Mrs. Porter called from inside the living room. "You only just got here." Bree turned back and saw Mrs. Porter smiling at her, still doing her gyrations within the circle. "So what the fuck is all this?" Bree asked. "Fucking witchcraft? You put a spell on my husband to have him kill me? For what?" "Clever girl," Mrs. Porter said. "You put together quite a bit of it, but this isn't witchcraft. We aren't witches. We're simply servants of Lo-Ka-Ta." "Who the fuck is Lo-Ka-Ta?" Bree asked. Mrs. Porter flashed Bree a wide smile before saying, "He is a deity, the god of chaos, and every so often we need to make sacrifices in his name." Bree couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then suddenly parts of the story were lining up. "The last tenants. You did this to them too." Not exactly the same thing," Mrs. Porter said. "It's true, we used the chaos to feed Lo-Ka-Ta, but we weren't able to use them for our next transference." Bree didn't understand what this crazy bitch was talking about. "What's a transference?" she asked. "Well, you see, my husband and I can't go on being loyal servants to Lo-Ka-Ta in these aging bodies. Every once in a while, we need to undergo a bit of an upgrade, if you will. Trade in the old model." Mrs. Porter laughed. Bree's stomach dropped in sudden comprehension. "Why didn't you do the transference with the last couple?" Did she even want to know? "Ah," Mrs. Porter replied. "Well, unfortunately, poor Jacob was a bit too heavy-handed in dispatching his woman. Couldn't use the body. Plus, he then blew his own brains out. We need a fresher stock for the transference." Mrs. Porter nodded behind Bree. Bree turned just as Mr. Porter's fist connected with her face. It's the last thing she saw before everything went dark. She awoke sometime later. Her hands and feet were strapped to something, a chair, Bree guessed, because she was also in a sitting position. She was blindfolded, but she could hear the Porters moving around and whispering. "Things are a little off. We've surely created enough chaos for him," Mr. Porter said. "Yes, we just need to get our hands a little more dirty and finish the job," Mrs. Porter replied. "No problem. We did it before. Remember 1924? After a few more minutes of whispers and unseen goings-on, Bree could hear footsteps coming towards her. Someone walked up and pulled the blindfold off of her face. Candle lights flashed back into view. Bree had to blink several times to fully regain her vision. Mr. Porter was standing there grinning at her. "You certainly are a pretty one," he said, caressing her cheek. "I can't wait till the missus lets me take you for a ride." Bree spat in his face. Mr. Porter laughed and then slapped her hard across the cheek. Bree could taste blood in her mouth. This was fucked. This disgusting man intended to do horrible things to her, and she couldn't do anything to stop him. Well, technically, she supposed. He wouldn't actually be doing terrible things to her. Be doing them to his wife in her body, but that didn't make it any better. He stepped away, revealing Mrs. Porter back in the circle, doing her weird movements and low chants. The candle started to give off a faint green glow, which grew brighter and more green with every new set of chants. The eyes of the Lo-Ka-Ta bust were also glowing with that same green color. Mr. Porter dragged Bree's chair over beside the circle, just to the right of where his wife was performing the ritual. He took position right behind Bree, hands on her shoulders. She fought against his touch, against the restraints of the chair, but she couldn't escape. "Help! Help! Help me!" she screamed into the apartment, but it fell on deaf ears. Mrs. Porter's eyes grew wider, and her chants doubled in octave, taking on an unrecognizable tone. Movement by the altar caught Bree's eyes. The Lokata bust had began to float. It lifted out of the altar cabinet and hovered 8 feet off the ground, just on the outside of the circle. The shadows of the room started to envelop it, forming a shapeless cloak stretching from the neck of the bust down to the ground. Then the shadows began to take shape and formed a gangly, crooked body with lanky arms and legs. Its skin was a mute gray color, same as the material of the bust. The stone face of Lokata was now slowly starting to animate. The eyes twitched, the jaws opened and closed. A horrible low hiss began to come from the thing. Bree screamed again, but it was cut short by Mr. Porter's hand clasping around her throat from behind. He squeezed harder and harder, her air totally gone. She felt as though he may crack the vertebrae at the top of her spine. Her gaze shot up to Lokata, who was grinning at her from across the room. Then her sight began to blur and started to give way to blackness. Just then a loud crack echoed in the room. The pressure on Bree's throat subsided. My neck, Bree thought. He just broke my neck. But she was able to control her head movements. She looked up to see Mr. Porter stumbling toward the altar, holding the side of his head, which was spilling blood out of it like a faucet. Adam stepped into view beside her, holding his David Ortiz autographed bat. He wasted no time and rammed it into Mr. Porter's ribs. When Mr. Porter bent down to grab his new injury, Adam swung hard for his face. He connected, and a wet squelch sounded just before Mr. Porter's nose was driven back into his skull. The force of the impact sent him sailing into the altar. The candles, Bree's and Adam's wedding glasses, all of it came spilling onto the floor, flooding the circle. Mrs. Porter screamed, "No! What have you done?" The living idol of Lokata lifted a heavy foot, drove it crashing down onto Mrs. Porter's chest, flattening her against the floor. She screamed and squirmed under his weight. "Please, no, we served you well for over 200 years." She spat through a bloodied mouth. Lokata bent down and lifted Mr. Porter's broken body in one hand. A blanket of darkness gathered behind the deity. He threw Mr. Porter into it. There was no sound, no impact. Mr. Porter was just gone. Mrs. Porter continued to sob under his foot. He reached down, wrapped a massive hand around Mrs. Porter's head, and lifted her up. He held her, arm outstretched towards Bree. Adam stepped out in front of her, bat held up ready to strike. Mrs. Porter started to scream. Blood began to pool out from her eyes, nose, and mouth. Her hand shot up to Lokata's to try and loosen his grip. This caused him to double it. Her screams reached a new high as he squashed her head like a soft peach. An explosion of blood and brain matter splashed Adam and Bree. Lokata then tossed the near-headless body of Mrs. Porter into the dark curtain behind him. He stared at Adam and Bree, and then he winked as he too stepped back into the blackness himself. As soon as he was through the curtain, it closed itself until there was no trace of it within the room. Adam quickly spun to Bree and knelt down in front of her, putting his arms gently on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. Bree's eyes filled with tears and she began to cry. "Not at all." She sniffled, trying to fight back the tears. "Let me cut you out of this chair," Adam said, running to the kitchen and then returning with scissors. With her bonds released, Bree stood and threw her arms around Adam. He held her tight. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, till Adam said, "We should probably call the cops." Fourth morning, 7:05 a.m. The police had just left Bree and Adam's apartment. They were still sorting out the crime scene downstairs at the Porters. Adam had told them that Mr. Porter had knocked him out and kidnapped Bree, and when he came to, he went downstairs to find them in their apartment with Bree tied up. They were getting ready to kill her, so he fought the two of them back, and eventually they made a run for it. Bree backed up this story, and given the state of their two injuries and the horror scene downstairs, it seemed to be enough to convince the police. 6 months later. "Hey, babe, What do you want to do for dinner tonight? Adam called from the kitchen. Ooh, I think we're feeling like Mediterranean, Bree replied, rubbing the small bump of her belly. Little Loca is craving some harissa chicken. Little Loca? Adam asked, walking over and sitting beside his wife on the couch. Don't you think that's a little fucked up, naming her after a chaos demon? Bree laughed. Maybe a little. But I don't want us to forget how far we've come. Adam looked as though he needed more convincing. Plus, I think Lokata was as much a victim of the Porters as we were. He was constantly being summoned and his powers used against his will. You think? Adam replied. Bree bent forward and kissed him on the forehead. I do, and I think calling our little girl Loca will keep us in his good graces, she smiled. Adam shrugged. I guess. It's kind of a cute name. Bree kissed him again. It is. Now go get our food. We're starving. Adam rose and bowed at the waist. As you wish. He walked over to the door and added, Stay out of trouble till I get back. After he left, Bree walked over to the wall where the red spot used to be. He hadn't seen it since that night 6 months ago. Bree put her hand on the wall. No more bad nights here, baby girl, she said to the baby in her belly. Lokata will help us. He'll help us only make good memories. As she turned away from the wall, a faint green glow could be seen emanating around the edges of her eyes. She started to hum a tune that had become quite regular in their home. This has been a production of Fear Point. If you enjoy this episode and you're listening to it in podcast form, please follow and download the episode. It'll greatly help us. If you're listening to it on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thank you.